The Mirror of Retribution, Chapter 1, The Smell of Burnt Flesh and Betrayal. The air in the White Cedar Behavioral Institute did not smell of medicine or cleanliness. It smelled of ozone, scorched skin and the stagnant metallic tang of suppressed terror. Luck Nyamdi lay strapped to a cold, stainless steel table. The leather restraints bit into his wrists and ankles, the coarse material having long ago abraded his skin into raw, weeping sores. Above him, the fluorescent lights flickered with a rhythmic, nauseating hum that seemed to sync with the pounding of his heart. "Now, Mr. Luck," a voice drawled, oily and devoid of empathy. It was Dr. Tran, a man whose medical license was a shield for his sadism. "We must address these delusions of yours. Your wife, the lovely Mrs. Havan Chi, is deeply concerned. You keep insisting that you aren't depressed, that you aren't suicidal. Such denial is a symptom of the deepest rot." Luck tried to speak, but the rubber bite block in his mouth reduced his voice to a pathetic guttural groan. His eyes, bloodshot and sunken, darted to the corner of the room. There she stood, Havan Chi, his wife of 5 years. She was dressed in a pristine, cream-colored silk suit that cost more than a nurse's yearly salary. Her hair was gathered in a perfect, elegant bun, not a single strand out of place. She looked like a grieving angel, her eyes brimming with calculated tears as she clutched a designer handkerchief. "Do it, doctor," she whispered, her voice a flute-like melody of deception. "His suffering so much. If this is the only way to bring my husband back to me, then please." Luck's internal scream was a silent roar. "I am not sick! You drugged me! You forged the signatures!" The doctor flipped a switch. The first surge of electricity was a white-hot blade through his brain. Luck's body arched violently against the straps, his muscles snapping taut until he thought his bones would splinter. The world dissolved into a jagged kaleidoscope of pain. Behind his eyelids, he saw flashes of his life: the day he met Van Chi, the way she had looked at him with such feigned devotion, the way he had handed her the keys to his empire. As the current subsided, leaving him twitching and gasping, the door to the treatment room creaked open. A man stepped in. Lam Hao. He was Luck's best friend, a man Luck had pulled from poverty and made a partner in his firm. Lam Hao didn't look at Luck, he looked at Van Chi. He reached out, his hand sliding familiarly down her waist, pulling her into a possessive embrace. "Is it done?" Lam Hao asked, his voice low and hungry. "Almost," Van Chi replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The doctor says 3 more sessions and his cognitive functions will be permanently reset. He'll be a vegetable." "How? A legal ghost. Everything will be ours." Luck's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, dying bird. Through the haze of agony he saw the small television mounted on the wall. A news-breaking bulletin flashed across the screen. "Crisis in the Diamond District. A black SUV registered to billionaire Luck Nyamdi has just plowed through a Tiffany Co. storefront. Reports of a 20-car pileup. Eyewitnesses claim the driver, identified as Mr. Luck himself, was seen laughing as he accelerated into the crowd." Luck's eyes widened. "I'm here. I'm tied to a chair. How can I be there?" Van Chi turned to the TV, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Look at that, darling, you're a monster in the eyes of the world now." A depressed, manic billionaire who finally snapped. She walked over to him, leaning down so her perfume, the scent of lilies and rot, filled his nostrils. She pressed a set of divorce papers and a full confession of the accident against his chest. "The mob is waiting outside." "Nyamdi," she hissed. "They want your blood for the lives you just took. If you sign these, I might let the doctor stop the shocks. If not," she signaled the doctor. The machine whirred to life again. The pain was no longer just physical. It was the psychic agony of a man watching his entire existence being erased. He was being framed for a massacre he could not have committed, and his executioners were the people he had loved most. The last thing Luck Nyamdi saw before his heart gave out under the strain of the third shock was the image of his own face on the T-screen, a man who looked exactly like him, grinning into a security camera, covered in the blood of innocence. Then there was only darkness. Cold, absolute, and silent. Chapter 2, The Calculated Sin. Gasped. Luck Nyamdi lunged forward, his lungs burning as if they were filled with acid. He hit the floor hard, the plush Persian rug scratching his cheek. He stayed there for a long time, shivering, waiting for the bite of the leather straps, the hum of the electricity. But there was only the sound of a ticking grandfather clock and the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets. He opened his eyes. He wasn't in the clinic, he was in his study. The moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the mahogany desk and the half-empty glass of scotch. He looked at his wrists. No sores. No scars. He looked at the calendar on the desk. July 14th. The Tiffany incident was July 15th. He had 24 hours. The shock of the rebirth was a physical weight, but Luck's mind, honed by years of corporate warfare, suppressed the panic. He didn't have time for a breakdown. If he followed the same path, he would be drugged by 8:300 am. Kidnapped to the clinic by noon and dead by sunset. He heard footsteps, light, rhythmic, deceptively soft. Darling, why are you on the floor? Did you fall? Van Chi stood in the doorway, wearing a silk nightgown that shimmered like moonlight. She looked beautiful. She looked like a viper. In his previous life, he would have reached for her hand, apologized for his clumsiness, and let her lead him to bed, where she would offer him a vitamin that was actually a potent sedative. Not tonight. Luck looked up, and for a split second, the sheer unadulterated hatred in his eyes made Van Chi flinch. He quickly masked it, drooping his shoulders, playing the role of the broken man she expected. Just a dizzy spell, he muttered, his voice raspy. Oh, you've been working too hard, she said, approaching him with a glass of water. Here, take your medicine, it will help you sleep. Luck took the glass. He could smell the faint, bitter undertone of the sedative. He pretended to drink, letting the liquid pool in his mouth before stumbling and spitting it back into his sleeve as he coughed. I need air, he said, standing up. It's late, I said I need air, he snapped. He saw the flicker of annoyance in her eyes, followed by a predatory gleam. She thought he was becoming unstable. Perfect, he needed her to believe the depression narrative was working, but he needed a different ending. Luck walked to the hallway mirror. He looked at his face, the face that would be used tomorrow to kill people. He knew how they did it now. A silicone mask. Lamha was roughly his build. With a high-end mask in his car, it was easy to fool low-res security cameras. He had to create a logical impossibility, an alibi that no one, not even the most corrupt judge, could ignore. He turned back to Van Chi. She was watching him, her phone already in her hand, likely texting Lamha that the patient was acting out. Van Chi, Luck said, his voice cold. I know about you and how. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Van Chi's face didn't crumble. It hardened. I don't know what you're talking about. You're hallucinating again. I saw the messages, Luck lied, stepping closer. I saw the way you look at him. You're a whore, Van Chi. A pathetic, gold-digging parasite. This was the provocation. In his first life, Luck was a gentleman to a fault. He never raised his voice. He never fought back. Van Chi sneered, her mask finally slipping. And what if I am? You're a shell of a man, You're weak. No wonder your own mother prefers how over you. The mention of his mother sent a jolt of pain through him. But he stayed focused. He needed her to strike him, or he needed to create a scene. Get out, Luck growled. This is my house too, she retorted. Luck reached out and grabbed her arm, not hard enough to break bone, but enough to leave a mark. He then picked up a crystal vase from the side table and hurled it against the wall. Crash! I'll kill you! Luck screamed, making sure his voice carried to the servants' quarters. I'll kill both of you. Van Chi looked shocked. Then she smiled. This was perfect for her. Go ahead, show everyone how crazy you are. Luck didn't stop. He began systematically destroying his own study. He ripped books from shelves, smashed his computer monitor, and overturned the heavy mahogany desk. He was a whirlwind of controlled rage. Then he did something Van Chi didn't expect. He picked up the house phone and dialed 911. Help, Luck said into the receiver, his voice trembling with a mix of real and feigned terror. I've lost control. I'm hurting my wife. I'm breaking everything. Please send the police to 128 Maple Drive. Hurry, before I do something I can't undo. He hung up. Van Chi stared at him, her jaw dropping. What are you doing? I'm giving you what you wanted, darling, Luck whispered, his eyes dark and hollow. A record of my instability. But I'm doing it on my terms. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Luck took a shard of the broken vase and made a shallow cut on his own forearm, then handed the shard to Van Chi. Here, he said. Tell them I attacked you. Tell them I'm a danger to society. When the police burst through the door 10 minutes later, they found a room in shambles, a weeping woman with a bruised arm, and a man sitting calmly in the center of the wreckage, his hands held out, waiting for the cuffs. As the metal ratcheted shut around his wrists, Luck looked at Van Chi. He leaned in, whispering so only she could hear, This is the safest place for me tonight. But where will you be when the sun rises? Van Chi Chapter 3 The Sanctuary of Iron Bars. The holding cell at the 4th precinct was a grim box of gray concrete and the smell of industrial disinfectant and old sweat. For most men of Luck Nyam's stature, this would be a nightmare, a descent into the bowels of humiliation. For Luck, it was a fortress. He sat on the narrow, plastic-covered cot, his back against the cold wall. Across from him sat his cellmate, a man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to record everything with the precision of a camera lens. You don't look like a wife-beater, the man said. His voice was gravelly, the tone of a man who had seen too much and believed too little. Luck didn't look up. Appearances can be deceiving. Mac Lam, the man said, extending a hand. Journalist. Or I was, until I dug too deep into the city's zoning board and ended up here on a drunk and disorderly charge that was mostly fiction. Luck looked at him then. Mac Lam, the name rang a bell. In his previous life, Mac Lam had been the only journalist who had questioned the Tiffany incident, writing a column about the logical inconsistencies of the car chase. He had been found dead in an alley 2 weeks later. Ruled a robbery gone wrong. Luck NIMD, Luck replied, shaking the hand. Mac Lamb's eyebrows shot up. The shipping magnate. What the hell are you doing in a precinct cell on a Tuesday night? Making sure I have a witness, Luck said quietly. Outside the bars, the night sergeant, a man named Miller, walked by rapping his baton against the steel. Keep it down, NIMD, your lawyer's been calling, but the captain says you're staying put until the morning arraignment since you confessed to being a danger. That's fine, Sergeant, Luck called out. I'm quite comfortable. Luck spent the night awake. He watched the small, barred window as the sky turned from black to a bruised purple. He knew what was happening in the outside world. At that very moment, Havan Chi and Lam Ha were likely celebrating. Their problem was locked away. They would think the police station was just a temporary delay. They would proceed with their plan to have the doppelganger commit the crimes, assuming that a rich man like Luck would just pay his way out of jail by morning, making it look like he had been released and then went on a rampage. But Luck had requested a psychiatric hold. He had told the intake officer he was hearing voices and wanted to hurt himself. Under the law, that meant 24-hour observation. At 900 am, a young doctor entered the cell area accompanied by 2 officers. Mr. Luck, Mr. Aris. I'm here for your evaluation. Luck stood up. He looked haggard, his shirt torn, his eyes shadowed. Thank you, doctor. I've been feeling very disconnected from reality. I don't trust myself. As the doctor began his assessment, Luck made sure to stay within the direct line of sight of the security camera in the corner of the room. He spoke clearly, he checked his watch frequently, and he even asked the doctor for the exact time to help ground his senses. He was building a digital paper trail of his presence. Meanwhile, 20 kilometers away, a black SUV roared to life. Chapter 4. The Phantom Criminal. The afternoon sun was a blinding glare through the bars of the precinct's common room. Luck was sitting at a table, nursing a cup of lukewarm water, when the atmosphere in the station shifted. It started with the phones. Every desk in the bullpen began ringing simultaneously. Officers who had been lounging with coffee suddenly stood up, their faces turning pale as they looked at the wall-mounted televisions. Mac Lamb, who was sitting across from Luck, narrowed his eyes. Something big just went down. Luck looked at the TV. Breaking news, terror in the Diamond District. The footage was shaky, captured by a bystander's smartphone. A black SUV, Luck's SUV, license plate clearly visible, was jumping the curb. The sound of screaming was a visceral wall of noise. The car smashed through the front of the Tiffany Co. flagship store, glass exploding like diamonds in the sun. The camera zoomed in, the driver's side door opened, a man stepped out. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, the exact suit Luck had in his closet. He had Luck's jawline, Luck's high forehead, Luck's eyes. The man looked directly into a nearby security camera, tipped an imaginary hat, and began firing a gold-plated handgun into the air before jumping back into the car and tearing away. Jesus, Mac Lamb whispered, looking from the screen to the man sitting 3 feet away from him. That's you. The precinct turned into a hornet's nest. Sergeant Miller ran toward the cells, his hand on his holster. NIMD, stand up, hands on your head. Now, Luck didn't move, he didn't panic. He simply pointed to the clock on the wall, then to the security camera in the common room. I've been sitting here for 12 hours, Sergeant, Luck said, his voice calm and resonant in the sudden silence of the room. I was talking to dear Eris 20 minutes ago. I ate the prison lunch 10 minutes ago. How could I be in the Diamond District? Miller froze. He looked at the TV, where Luck NIMD was currently leading a dozen police cruisers on a high-speed chase through the city's main artery. Then he looked at the Luck NIMD sitting in front of him, wearing a torn shirt and holding a plastic cup. Check the footage, Luck urged. Check the logs. I haven't left this building. This is impossible, Miller muttered, but he radioed the captain. Sir, we have a situation. The suspect in the Tiffany robbery has currently in cell block B. Has been here all night. The logical paradox had begun. For the next 4 hours, Luck was the center of a storm. The FBI arrived, followed by the district attorney. They analyzed the precinct's security tapes with the intensity of forensic scientists. There was no gap. No body double could have swapped places with him. Luck NIMD had been under constant, recorded surveillance by the police themselves. And yet, the man on the news was his twin in every way. It's a mask, Mac Lamb whispered to Luck as the police were distracted. A high-end medical silicone mask. I've heard of them, used by deep cover operatives, but to get one that perfect someone spent millions. I know, Luck replied. The chase ended in a horrific pileup on the bridge. The SUV hit a tanker, causing a massive explosion. The news reported that the driver had jumped into the river just before the impact. He was missing. Presumed drowned or escaped. At 6:00 p.m. Luck's 5-day administrative detention for the domestic disturbance began. The police couldn't charge him for the robbery. They had the most airtight alibi in the history of crime, but they kept him on the initial charge. Luck sat back on his cot. The first phase was complete. He was alive. He was innocent of the massacre. But the real monsters were still outside, and they were about to change their tactics. Chapter 5: The Mother's Poison. On the 5th day, the gates of the detention center opened. Luck stepped out into a literal war zone. 100 cameras flashed simultaneously. The air was thick with the shouts of reporters, and the screams of the Victims' Families Association, a group rapidly organized by a mysterious donor. Murderer. How did you get out? Money buys justice. The public didn't care about logical paradoxes or alibis. They saw his face on the news, and they wanted blood. In the center of the mob, a black Mercedes-Benz pulled up. The crowd parted. A woman stepped out, dressed in mourning black, her face veiled. Mrs. Luck, his mother. Luck felt a cold stone settle in his stomach. In his first life, she had stood by his bedside in the clinic, stroking his hair while the doctor turned up the voltage. She had told him it was for his own good. She had told him he was a disappointment. She walked toward him now, her footsteps heavy with performative grief. She didn't hug him. She stopped 3 feet away and fell to her knees, wailing for the cameras. "My son! Oh, my poor sick son," she cried, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Please, everyone, have mercy." He didn't know what he was doing. He's been suffering from severe clinical depression. He's lost his mind. Havan Che and Lam Ho appeared behind her, playing the roles of the supportive daughter-in-law and the loyal friend. Van Chi stepped forward, her eyes red-rimmed. "Naim Dai, please, just come with us. We have arranged a private clinic. You need help. You're not a criminal, you're just broken." Lam Ho put a firm hand on Luck's shoulder, his grip tightening painfully. "Sign the papers, Naim D. Admit you were behind the wheel but weren't in your right mind. If you don't, this mob will tear you apart before you reach your car. I can't protect you from the world, only from yourself." They were gaslighting the entire nation. By having his mother and wife confirm his mental illness, they were explaining away the alibi as a trick or a fugue state, even if it didn't make sense. They wanted him back in that clinic. They wanted the shocks to start again. Luck looked at his mother. "Mother, do you really believe I did it?" Mrs. Luck looked up, and for a fleeting second, the veil of grief slipped. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with a strange, shimmering hatred. "It doesn't matter what I believe," she hissed, low enough that only he could hear. "How is the son I should have had? You were always just a placeholder for your father's money. Now be a good boy and go to the clinic." The betrayal hit harder than the electricity ever had. Luck looked at the cameras, then at the 3 people who had orchestrated his death. He didn't kneel. He didn't weep. He stood tall, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I'm not going to any clinic," Luck said, his voice amplified by the microphones held toward him. "And I'm not signing anything. If you want to prove I was the one in that car, then let's go to the station. Let's look at the evidence. Because I have a story to tell, and I think the world would find it very illuminating." Chapter 6. The Unbreakable Wall. The interrogation room at the Central Police Headquarters was soundproof, windowless, and smelled of stale coffee. Luck sat on one side of the table. Facing him were the chief of police and the lead investigator, a woman named Detective Sarah Vance, known for having a bullshit detector that never failed. "Mr. Luck," Vance said, tossing a folder onto the table. "The public is calling for your head. Your own family says you're a mental patient. The video from the Tiffany store is a 99% match for your facial structure, and yet, Luck finished. I was in a holding cell 20 kilometers away, being evaluated by a police psychologist and recorded by 4 different cameras. We checked the cameras for tampering," the chief growled. "There is no way they were hacked. It's a closed-circuit system." "So, Detective," Luck leaned forward, "how can one man be in 2 places at once? Is it magic? Or is it a crime much more sophisticated than a depressed man snapping?" "You have a theory?" Vance asked, her interest piqued. "I have more than a theory. I have a request. The SUV that crashed on the bridge, it's in the impound lot, isn't it?" "It's a charred hunk of metal," the chief said. "The fire department took 10 minutes to put it out." "Actually," Luck corrected, "it took them 3 minutes. An anonymous caller reported the fire before the crash even happened, providing the exact coordinates. The engine block is melted, yes, but the interior, specifically the steering wheel and the door handles, they were sprayed with a specialized fire-retardant foam by the first responders who arrived strangely early." Vance narrowed her eyes. "How do you know that?" "Because I was the anonymous caller," Luck said. In his first life, the car had burned for 20 minutes, destroying all data and fingerprints. This time, Luck had used a burner phone from the precinct sneaked to him by Mac Lamb in exchange for an exclusive story to call the fire station near the bridge, pretending to be a distraught witness who saw a leaking fuel truck at that location minutes before the SUV arrived. "Check the car, Detective," Luck said. "Check the fingerprints on the inner side of the steering wheel. And check the dent on the headrest." Vance left the room. 2 hours passed. Luck waited. He knew the risks. If Lam Hao had been careful, if he had worn gloves. But Luck knew Lam Hao. Hao was arrogant. He loved the feel of the leather. He loved the victory of driving Luck's car. Vance returned. She didn't look triumphant. She looked stunned. The fingerprints don't match you, Mr. Luck. Who do they match? They don't match anyone in the criminal database. But we did find a trace of biological material on the headrest, a skin cell. We're running it against your family's DNA profiles now. Luck smiled. While you do that, you might want to talk to my cellmate from the 4th precinct, Mac Lam. He has something for you. Chapter 7, The Master of Disguise. Mac Lam entered the police station not as a prisoner, but as a whistleblower. He walked into the observation room and handed Detective Vance a small, high-tech recording device. I was a journalist before I was a drunk, Mac said. I still have my toys. When Luck Nyamd's wife and friend came to visit him in detention, they didn't realize that the man sitting in the next booth wasn't just another convict. He hit play. The recording was grainy but clear. Van Chi's voice, is the mask ready? The skin tone looks a bit off in the sunlight. Lam Hao's voice, it's perfect, Chi. I've practiced the walk, the laugh. By the time the police figure out he was in jail, the Luck Nyamd the world knows will be a mass murderer. We'll have him committed to the clinic, and once has there. Drewster Tran will make sure he never speaks a coherent word again. Van Chi and his mother, Lam Hao Shezin. She wants the inheritance for us. She never loved him, Chi. He was just the correct son, the real one. The room went deathly silent. Detective Vance looked at Luck through the one-way glass. What did he mean by the real one? Luck's expression was a mask of granite. I think it's time we looked into my mother's history. Specifically, her charity work in the slums 30 years ago, around the same time she was struggling to conceive an heir for my father. The investigation shifted gears with the speed of a racing car. A raid was authorized on Lam Hao's private penthouse, a property Luck didn't even know existed. Inside, they found a workshop that looked like a movie studio's makeup department. On a mannequin head sat the mirror. It was a silicone mask of Luck Nyamd's face. It was a masterpiece of horror-porous skin, individual hair follicles, a texture that felt like human flesh. Next to it was the gold-plated handgun. And in the safe, they found the beeps logs from Lam Hao's phone. The coordinates matched the Tiffany store, the bridge, and the Behavioral Institute. But the most damning evidence was a single, dusty file found in the back of Mrs. Luck's personal safe. Chapter 8, The Bloodline Scandal. The confrontation took place in the grand foyer of the Luck mansion. The police had surrounded the house. The mob outside had been dispersed by the news of the silicone mask, replaced by a new, hungrier crowd of reporters sensing the scandal of the century. Luck Nyamd walked into his own home, followed by Detective Vance and a dozen officers. Mrs. Luck, Van Chi and Lam Hao were in the living room, bags packed, preparing to flee. Going somewhere? Luck asked. Lam Hao lunged for a gun hidden in his waistband, but he was tackled by 3 officers before he could draw. Van Chi fell back onto the sofa, her face a mask of pale terror. Nyamd, please, she begged. He forced me. Ho threatened to kill me if I didn't help him. Luck ignored her. He walked straight to his mother. She was standing by the fireplace, her back straight, her chin high. Even now she refused to break. Why? Luck asked, his voice a whisper. I gave you everything. I was a dutiful son. I built this empire for us. You were a replacement, she spat, the venom finally bursting forth. Your father was obsessed with his bloodline. But he was sterile. He didn't know. I had to find a child from a man I actually loved. That was how. But I couldn't bring a street rat into this house. I had to adopt a suitable baby from an agency to satisfy the board of directors. That was you, Nyamd, a nameless, bloodless orphan. The truth was a physical blow. Luck staggered back. He wasn't even a Luck. He was a prop in her lifelong play. I spent 30 years watching you enjoy the life that belonged to my real son. She continued, her eyes burning with madness. I hated every meal you ate, every success you had. When Hao came to me and said he wanted to take what was his, I was more than happy to help him kill you. The DNA results came back, Mrs. Luck, Detective Vance said, stepping forward. The skin cell on the car's headrest. It's a 99% match for Lam Hao, and his DNA shows he is indeed your biological son. She looked at Lam Hao. But unfortunately for both of you, being a biological son doesn't give him a license to commit mass murder. He didn't kill anyone, Mrs. Luck screamed. It was an accident. The pilot killed 4 people, including a 6-year-old girl, Vance said coldly. That's first-degree murder during the commission of a felony. In this state, that's the death penalty. Lam Hao's bravado broke. He began to sob, his body shaking.
No, it was her idea. She said the mask would protect me. She said Nyamd would take the fall.
You're all going down together, Vance said. Take them away. Chapter 9, The Price of Freedom. 6 months later. The trial of the century had concluded. Lam Hao was sentenced to death. He had tried to appeal, claiming maternal influence, but the evidence of his own meticulous planning was too great. Mrs. Luck was sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy and accessory to murder. Without her son and her wealth, she withered. Reports said she refused to speak to anyone, staring at the walls of her cell, calling out house name. Havan Chai had managed to plea down to 20 years by testifying against the others, but her reputation was destroyed. She was the most hated woman in the country. Luck Niamdi stood at the gate of the women's correctional facility. He had come for one final thing. He was led into the visiting room. Van Chi sat behind the glass. Her hair was thin, her skin sallow. She looked 20 years older. Niamdi, she whispered, a spark of hope in her eyes. Did you come to get me out? You still love me, don't you? You can use your money, your influence. Luck didn't say a word. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, crumpled piece of paper. It was the divorce decree from his first life, the one she had tried to force him to sign in the clinic, now stained with his own blood from that previous existence. Of course, in this life, the paper was technically new, but he had kept it as a reminder. I already signed it, Van Chi, Luck said, but not because you forced me. Because I am finally free of you. He slid the paper through the slot. I have sold the company, Luck said. I have sold the house. I've donated the proceeds to the families of the victims of the Tiffany incident. I'm leaving this city tonight. Where will you go? She cried, banging on the glass. You have nothing! I have my life, Luck replied, and for the first time it actually belongs to me. Chapter 10, The Horizon. The salt spray of the Mediterranean was a cool mist against Luck's face. He stood on the deck of a small, modest sailboat, miles away from the nearest coastline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of gold, violet and deep, bruised crimson, the colors of a healing wound. He thought back to the smell of the clinic, the hum of the electricity, the cold eyes of his mother. It felt like a dream now, a nightmare from a different man's life. He had learned that logic was a weapon and memory was a shield. But most of all, he had learned that retribution wasn't about the blood spilled. It was about the truth revealed. He picked up a small, silicon fragment, a piece of the mask that the police had given him as a souvenir after the trial. He looked at it. It was just plastic, it had no power. He tossed it into the deep dark water. He watched it sink, disappearing into the abyss where all masks eventually go. Luck Niamdi turned his back on the past and steered the boat toward the open sea. The air was clean. His heart was steady. The mirror was broken, and the man who remained was finally, truly, himself. In the first life I died for their sins, he whispered to the wind. In this life I lived to see them bury themselves. And tomorrow is mine. The end.